Want to get to the latest here as we take a live look over the Israel-Gaza border at this hour. A lot of different developments that are coming in over the past several hours here. According to U.S. and Israeli officials via Reuters, Israel has now wiped out more than half of Hamas's forces in the past 8 months. Again, that is according to Reuters. According to the report, Hamas is down to 9,000 to 12,000 fighters, with 7,000 to 8,000 of them entrenched in Rafah. The Israeli military also saying that an Israeli soldier was killed while battling Hamas terrorists who attempted to infiltrate Israel from southern Gaza. That soldier, just 34 years old. I do want to talk about all of the latest developments here, so let's bring in Brian Katulis, a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk to you about that possible infiltration there from Gaza into Israel. We know from the IDF that they say Hamas terrorists tried to make their way into Israel from Gaza. We've heard from President Biden as recently as a week ago, where he has said that Hamas has been beaten down by Israel. They no longer have the power to commit another October 7th attack. But is this demonstrating that they could potentially try, as you see terrorists try to get into Israel?
I think it both could be true. I mean, when I heard President Biden's statement, it reminded me a little bit of what George W. Bush, when he was president in 2003, said a few months into the Iraq War. He stood in front of a mission accomplished banner. And the problem with these sorts of wars, especially ones that involve terrorist groups, is that you never really fully win in the conventional military sense. Even with ISIS, where we had a devastating campaign started by President Obama and continued by President Trump and Biden, ISIS still remains some sort of a threat, as we've seen in its attack in Moscow a few months ago. So this infiltration, is one individual. I think there's many in Hamas. They've taken some big losses, but I think what President Biden perhaps was trying to say is that the scale of what happened on October 7th seems quite unlikely to ever happen again. And I don't think any Israeli leader or the Israeli security establishment will allow, droves of hundreds of terrorists to be able to get into Israel proper ever again.
We know that Reuters is now reporting that Israel has eliminated more than half of the Hamas militants who are there. So my question for you is, the complete destruction of Hamas a real possibility? We know that Netanyahu has said that is the ultimate goal of the war. So is that a real possibility?
I think it's really difficult to achieve that target because you never know, even with these numbers, how valid they are, because the ranks of Hamas may have increased, or the support for it may have increased, as some public opinion polls have, as the war goes on, or it could have gone down. The real question here, and this is a point of contention between the United States and Israel, frankly, between much of the world and the Arab world in particular and Israel, is that if you don't have a defined political end state, who's going to govern, you're not going to necessarily defeat Hamas in the broader sense. You could actually degrade its capability to conduct another attack, to prevent its ability to govern Gaza. I think that's quite possible. But Hamas as a political idea may be more difficult to defeat certainly without having a clear end state and the answer to the question of what's created after this conflict is over.
And I have to ask, because we know that there have been several ceasefire deals that have been discussed over the past several months. Right now, there is one on the table. My question for you is, why would Hamas accept a deal that could potentially lead to their ultimate destruction? That is something, once again, that Netanyahu has said needs to happen for the war to end.
It seems unlikely that they will actually accept any such deal. As we've seen, it's been almost a week since President Biden made his public statement about a three-phase plan to end this war. And neither Israel or Hamas have publicly accepted all of those terms, especially the latter phases 2 and 3. And most intel assessments indicate that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, seems to be elated with the position that he and his movement is in right now, despite the massive death and destruction in the Gaza Strip. They're willing to hide behind human shields, as we've seen. And they see themselves winning in part because they see public sentiment inside of the United States, Europe, other places, very critical of what Israel's doing, and they operate on that level. They have a different mentality and metric here, and I don't think there were high odds of Hamas accepting this deal. I hope they do, because it could lead to not just a temporary ceasefire, but a longer-term sustainable pause. But it seems like the leaders of this terrorist movement are willing to see this endless war go on for quite some time.
Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, has essentially said earlier this week that rather than accept a ceasefire deal, he actually wants to see the war expanded in Gaza. Is that a possibility? Could that even happen? How would that look?
It's already happening as we're sitting here speaking. I mean, Israel has gone from north to middle to south Gaza, and they're planning even further operations to expand it. So again, the question that remains unanswered almost 8 months into this war is, how does this end? And someone like Ben-Gvir, who comes from the more extreme right, he does not want a Palestinian state. There are some voices in Israel that want to push all the Palestinians that live in Gaza out and see Israel reoccupy Gaza and have Israeli Jews move back into Gaza as they did before 2005, before the Israeli withdrawal. So that's the big problem here, Josh, is that you've got a symbiotic relationship between the extremists amongst the Palestinians and the extremist voices inside of Israel too, who essentially agree on one thing, is that they don't want a two-state solution. And that's a key problem here, because a lot of those voices are the first roadblock or the first hurdle to actually resolving this immediate conflict, but then trying to get to a two-state solution.
Something that we have covered a lot here on Live Now from Fox, especially over the past several weeks, is that the IDF is saying several additional tunnels have been found underneath Rafah, and they lead into Egypt, which has been a question all along as to whether those tunnels exist. Now, my question for you, with more than 100 hostages still remaining believed to be in Gaza, is it possible that they've been moved out into Egypt?
It's always possible, but I think, as I understand the terrain, and I used to live in Egypt as well as Gaza in the 1990s, it would be difficult to move large numbers of people. There's uncertainty about how many of the hostages actually still remain alive. So anything's possible, but Egypt itself has pretty strong surveillance capabilities. It watches a lot of people. It's essentially a surveillance state. So I'd be surprised if that happened, but I wouldn't discount the possibility of it.
My last question for you here. We know that the U.S. is circulating a draft resolution that is expected to be sent over for a vote there to the United Nations Security Council early next week, and it does call for an immediate ceasefire. My question for you is that more symbolic? Does it actually mean anything if it does pass?
It doesn't mean much if there's, in fact, not agreement by the two main combatants to this conflict, Israel and Hamas, about the terms of it. So it's, I think, a bit more symbolic and diplomatic to present a framework that there's an off-ramp here. But the reality is that people calling for an immediate ceasefire and protests in America or in Europe, or people at the UN passing resolutions, it doesn't matter as much as what will really shape the calculus of the leaders of Israel and the leaders of Hamas right now. And as we've seen, for on again, off again diplomacy for more than 5-6 months now, the U.S., Qatar, Egypt has not been able to get the two main combatants, Israel and Hamas, to agree to terms for a ceasefire.
All right, Brian Katulis, thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to join us and help break down all the developments. Anything else you want to add at all before I let you go?
No, I mean, I hope that we see an end to this conflict, because I actually think there's an enormous opportunity for openings between Israel and its neighbors, including with Saudi Arabia. And there's a real choice here, I think, for the people of the region to whether they want to move forward and end this conflict or stay mired in it in this present awful situation.
All right, Brian, thanks so much and have a good rest of your day.
All right, thanks.